On March 3rd, 1889, in many different local Minneapolis newspapers, a strange personal ad was printed. It wrote, "I am an American young man, aged 22 years. I will give $50,000 to the lady who will become my wife within the next 60 days. She must have some property. State your age and full personal description. Enclosed stamp. G.D.B. Barton, Pelican Rapids, Minnesota." Now, trying to find love through newspapers wasn't exactly rare at the time. Lonely heart columns and matrimonial ads were not an uncommon sight. However, there were two eyebrow-raising things about this particular ad. Firstly, how brazenly transactional G.D. Barton's words were, almost as if he wanted to urgently buy a wife rather than court one. And secondly, the sum of money he was offering. According to this website, accounting for inflation, $50,000 in 1889 equates to just shy of $1.8 million in today's money. The ads caused a sensation. Hundreds of letters began to arrive at the Pelican Rapids post office from all parts of the country. Some people perhaps eager to wed the well-to-do mysterious man, others maybe just curious to learn more about him. But a couple of weeks after the initial ad was printed, new articles graced the local pages. On March 14th, we read in the St. Paul Daily Globe, a large number of letters addressed to G.D. Barton have accumulated in the post office, but still remain uncalled for, as no such person as G.D. Barton is known here. And this was the first part of the story I stumbled upon, this very newspaper article. I was actually researching something completely different and just found myself on this newspaper page. But the curious hint of a story about a mysterious magnate's matrimonial machinations caught my attention, and so I did a little digging. And in doing so, I fell down a rabbit hole into the dark world of turn-of-the-century matrimonial swindlers, stories of scammers who would first steal your heart and then swipe your savings book. Some women lost their fortunes and others, sadly, lost their lives. Let me show you what I found. As mentioned, we see the revelation that no such man as G.D. Barton actually lived in Pelican Rapids, printed on March 14th, along with the quote, "Diligent inquiry has failed to discover any clue to the advertiser who wants to pay such a liberal price for a wife." However, 3 days after this, on March 17th, a piece of evidence was actually delivered directly to the publisher and editor of the Park Region Pioneer newspaper, Anna E.B. Rathbun. Anna is an interesting character in this story. She's referred to as the Minnesota Editress in the St. Peter Tribune on October 12, 1897, as she, quote, "is the only woman in Minnesota who has the full responsibility of conducting a newspaper." You can read a little bit about her life in her obituary in the Pelican Rapids Press, November 8, 1923. We read that she was from New York and got into the newspaper business aged 10. At 22, she married Alonzo E. Rathbun from Illinois, who also worked in newspapers. Together, they worked in the print business on the East Coast before, quote, "owing to the ill health of the husband caused by injuries received in the Civil War, they moved to Minnesota in 1879 and settled near Pelican Rapids. The call of the press was too strong upon them, and it was not long until they moved into the village of Pelican Rapids and became the publishers of the Park Region Pioneer. Mr. Rathbun's health became worse, and he went back east, leaving the entire management and editorial work to his wife. And so one March morning, Anna, in her role as editor and publisher of the Pioneer, was probably sitting behind her typewriter, filling the room with the clicks and clacks of local news being punched onto the page, when a strange piece of mail was dropped onto her desk. The letter was addressed to the editor of the Pioneer. Inside the envelope, she found a note and another sealed letter. The note read, "Dear Sir, please give the enclosed letter to the postmaster in Pelican Rapids, and very greatly oblige, G.D.B. Now, firstly, we note this letter is addressed Dear Sir, and as mentioned, Anna was fairly well known to be the person who ran the newspaper. That struck me as strange, for the sender to know the Park Region Pioneer well enough to send it a letter, but to address the letter to Sir, implying they did not know the well-established fact that the paper was run by a woman, the Minnesota Editress. Curious. We will come back to that. The second strange thing, as reported in the Evening Journal, March 18th, was noticed by, I assume, Anna. And that was the letter was dated St. Paul, March 12th, but bearing a Morris, Minnesota postmark. What this means is that although G.D. Barton wrote on his letter that he was sending the letter from the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, he'd actually sent his letter from the smaller city of Morris. And in doing so, the letter received a Morris postmark from the post office. This was a rookie error by Barton. If his goal was to hide his true whereabouts, he just made a bit of a blunder. And so Anna presumably walked the enclosed letter over to the postmaster in Pelican Rapids, where the postmaster opened it and read a brief note from G.D. Barton. The letter ordered, quote, "All mail forwarded to G.D. Barton, St. Paul." If G.D. Barton was hoping the postmaster wouldn't share this information with Anna, he was sorely mistaken. What I think happened next is Anna, now with this bit of knowledge, shared it with a journalist friend who worked at another local paper, the Fergus Falls Journal. This paper prints the story. Sadly, we don't have an archive of this particular newspaper article, but the article in the Fergus Falls Journal is then picked up by other newspapers, and that's how we come to see it printed in the Evening Journal, March 18th. We know all this because 5 days later, on March 23rd, Anna reprints the story in her newspaper, the Park Region Pioneer, with the words, "This is how the FF Journal tells tales out of school," before reprinting the info I just gave you about the letter she'd received. And much to my amusement, Anna adds a note to the end of this news story. She writes, "Yes, the editor of the Pioneer is a receptacle for all kinds of confidences, and is not in the habit of betraying them. Hopes G.D.B. will consider her excusable for making an exception of him." Now at this point, the local newspaper writers do some sleuthing, and someone manages to eke out a little bit more information. We read in the Morris newspaper, The Sun, March 21st, 1889, after they reprint the story about the letter from the Evening Journal, they add, "Thus we trace him home. It appears that it is a certain young man of this village who is the real party, G.D. Barton being an assumed name. He seems to have made use of all the ingenuity he possesses to avoid suspicion and consequent detection, but of no avail, for he is now well known and the questionable game he practices is brought to light. He advertises under the assumed name, giving some neighbouring town as his address. When replies to the ad have accumulated at the town thus given, G.D. Barton instructs the postmasters to forward his mail to Morris in the care of blank, 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 Mr. Barton's friend. In this way, the young man has received a large amount of mail from Campbell and other neighbouring villages during his short stay here, and is now contemplating the enjoyment of another batch of sweet literature from fair correspondents who are after his $50,000, and who have more time, paper and ink to waste than they have common sense. There may be another chapter to this story when the name of the cause of the slightly sensational morsel will be public property." So yeah, even though they don't say how, we read here that in a short period of time, the Sun in Morris has pieced together quite a lot of the story. How do they figure out so much of G.D. Barton's game? It's not obvious because think about it like this. Thus far, G.D. Barton's plan was to have his mail forwarded to St. Paul, and we know he likely lived in Morris because of the postmark of his letter. So we imagine at some point he would have his mail forwarded again from St. Paul to Morris, in the same way that he was asking for his mail forwarded from Pelican Rapids to St. Paul. But as far as we know, he hadn't actually done this yet. So how can the publisher in The Sun so confidently say they know he instructs the postmasters to forward his mail to Morris in care of blank, 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 Mr. Barton's friend? Well, even though they don't state it, when I did a little digging, it became clear. It's because this wasn't G.D. Barton's first time doing this. He'd actually pulled this exact same bait and switch a few months earlier. But before I get into that, this might be a good time to pause and make sure we're all clear on the landscape in which this story is taking place. The broader concept of trying to find a partner to marry through the means of the newspaper. It is perhaps easy to think of dating apps like Tinder as a modern concept, but it's really just a modern delivery system for a much older service. As we read in the Evening Star, August 17th, 1909, "Boon for Bachelors, Many Marriages Arranged by Correspondence," by William E. Curtis. There is a great deal of courtship going on between the bachelors of Wyoming and the spinsters of the East, which is promoted by matrimonial agencies and newspaper advertising. Many marriages are arranged that way, and I am sure that a large portion are blessed. The postmasters of the ranch towns often act as go-betweens and references, and they probably know more about the business than anybody else. Several have assured me that every case of matrimony by correspondence that they have had anything to do with has turned out well, and that the average of happy marriages between strangers is as high as those of conventional arrangement. Matrimonial papers are popular out here and have a wide circulation. Matrimonial agencies are patronised in good faith. Sometimes the more enterprising and broad-minded bachelors use the Sunday editions of New York, Chicago and other papers as advertising mediums and insert requests for correspondence, object, matrimony, in the personal columns. People meeting their future spouses through the newspaper was not an odd thing. In the Salt Lake Tribune, June 14th, 1911, we read of a Parisian business which had on its books peers, princes and nobles of Europe. I guess it was a sort of Raya of its day, but it wasn't all sunshine and single-stem roses. We have examples of people using these services for dark purposes. Much like the modern-day story of the Tinder swindler, we can read the story from Halifax, England, in the Salt Lake Herald, December 20th, 1903. British marriages by press, matrimonial advertisements, romantic women, and a heartless swindler were the main themes of a strange story told in Halifax Police Court in London recently. The prisoner was Frederick Ramsden Riley, a good-looking and well-dressed man of 5 Prescott Street, Halifax, and he was charged with defrauding a number of women whose names, at the suggestion of the Chief Constable, were not disclosed. Early this year, a widow who gave evidence in the case advertised as follows in the Yorkshire Post. Widow lady without means wishes to correspond with a gentleman of good position with a view to matrimony. Riley answered the advertisement and an interview took place. So fascinating was he that the lady became enamoured, with the result that for 10 days between April 11 and April 21st, she maintained him and they visited Southampton together. Meanwhile, Riley, having no intention of settling down with the widow, had himself inserted a matrimonial advertisement in the same paper, which reads as follows: Matrimony, gentleman, good position, wishes correspondence with a domesticated lady, means not necessary, honourable. To this advertisement, he seems to have received 28 replies, and selecting the most likely, he deserted the widow at Southampton and travelled to Elland to meet his new inamorata. The interview was a satisfactory one, and was followed by another meeting at Brighouse. Subsequently, he visited the lady at Huddersfield, and it was announced that they were going to be married. To this lady, Riley posed as a man of great wealth, and on the grounds that his rent had not come in at the proper time, obtained several sums of money from her. Finally, he induced her to go with him to a place near Saltburn, and to live with him as his wife. By representing that he had some trouble with his agent, and was temporarily short of money, he got her to pay all expenses. From the widow, said the Chief Constable, in telling the story, it was estimated that he got £35, and jewellery worth £13, while from the second woman he got £53. And just to interject, that all adds up to £101, or about £16,000 in today's money. He enjoyed himself well, was generous with people he met, and generally posed as a walking millionaire. The magistrate sent him to prison for 12 months with hard labour. And even worse than this story, we do sadly see these newspaper romances leading to not just financial scams, but also murder. There's the case of the serial killer Harry Powers, who in the 1920s started to court women through Lonely Hearts ads, similar to the G.D.B Barton one, and he would, after creating a relationship with them, attempt to coerce money out of them. And then, in at least 2 provable cases, that of Asta Eicher and Dorothy Presta Lemke, murder them. And in the case of Asta Eicher, he not only killed her, but also, sadly, her 3 children, Greta, Harry and Annabelle. The bodies of all 5 victims were found in a room underneath Powers' garage. When he was arrested, the authorities found hundreds of letters that had been sent to him from women across the country. When the story was made public, letters poured in from families of missing people all over America, wondering if Powers had had something to do with their family members' disappearances. He was executed without admitting to any other murders, leaving us to only speculate the extent of his crimes. In the press, he was given the nickname Bluebeard. This is a reference to the folktale told notably by Charles Perrault of a rich man whose wives all mysteriously disappear. For those curious, the story goes that one day, after marrying yet another woman, Bluebeard says he must leave his castle and his new bride for a time. He gives her a set of keys which will open every door in the keep, but makes her promise not to open one particular door in the belly of the building. She may go wherever she pleases, except that one basement room. As you can imagine happens, overwhelmed by curiosity, the new bride wastes very little time before running downstairs and turning the one key she was not allowed to use and the one lock she was not allowed to loosen. When the door clunks open, she's met by a river of blood which pours from the horrific chamber, and the sight of the bodies of all of Bluebeard's previous wives strung up to the walls. So as not to make this like other videos of mine where I spend the whole time talking about folktales, I'll leave the story there. But spoilers, the bride lives and prospers at the end of the fable, and Bluebeard suffers the punishment he deserves. But back to our story. Now we're clear on both the commonness of such Lonely Heart ads, but also the known risks involved. With all that in mind, let's return to Minneapolis in mid-March 1889. Where last we left it, the Sun, on March 21st, 1889, had printed that they had figured out the game somewhat. My opinion on what happened is they went to the post office in Morris and asked the postmaster if he knew of a G.D.B. Barton, to which I imagine the postmaster said something like, "We've had quite a lot of mail sent on from Norcross for a George Barton, with the instruction that it be forwarded on to a friend, a young man who lives here." You'll see a bit later why I think this might have been the case, but for now, I guess just trust me on that being what likely happened. So now we have the knowledge that G.D.B. Barton is likely not his real name, and fairly strong proof that he lives in Morris, not Pelican Rapids, nor St. Paul's, as claimed. And now we also have a connection to Norcross. So, what happened next? 7 days later, on March 28th, his real name was revealed. I can read you the full article titled Is Unearthed from the Sun, March 28th, 1889, where they reprint the Evening Journal. They write, "He is unearthed. The mysterious G.D.B. Barton answers a fair correspondent. Readers of the daily papers will remember that several weeks ago, one G.D.B. Barton of Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, advertised for a wife. He was in such straits that he offered $50,000 to any young lady who would marry him. The unusual offer attracted considerable attention, and soon letters addressed to G.D.B. Barton began to pour into the little post office at Pelican Rapids by the hundred. The strangest feature was that the person to whom the letters were addressed failed to call for them, and the Pelican Rapids postmaster began to think that he would have to send in an application for increased accommodations. Pelican Rapids was not the only address given by the supposed lovelorn swain. Norcross, Minnesota was another post office designated as a way station of Cupid. A Minneapolis gentleman, in a spurt of fun and curiosity to see whether G.D.B. Barton was after matrimony or postage stamps, addressed a letter to him over a feminine signature. Yesterday, a reply was received. G.D.B. Barton was, of course, a fictitious name. The name signed was D.S. Benedict of Morris, Minnesota. And the writer described himself as a schoolteacher and printer. Though a Benedict, he wanted to become a Benedict. He was poor at the time of writing, but by the death of an uncle was left $100,000, that sum to be his 1 year after marriage, and not until then. Hence these heartthrobs. He proposed to give his fair correspondent $50,000, or half his fortune if she would marry him. In addition, she would receive the undivided attention of a man nearly 23 years of age, 5 foot 5 inches in height, weighing 140 pounds, tender-hearted beyond description, and called handsome. At last accounts, she was still considering the liberal proposition. There was considerable to be taken on faith. Evening Journal. And then 5 days later we get even more information from the Omaha Bee, April 2nd edition, with the directly titled front page article, Simply an Idiot. The young man who wants to pay $50,000 for a wife. Morris, Minnesota, April 1st. Special telegram to the Bee. Who is G.D.B. Barton? This query has been going the rounds of Minneapolis and St. Paul dailies, owing to an advertisement which appeared in the Twin City papers a short time ago, offering $50,000 for a wife. He is a resident of this village and works in the Tribune office. He is known here as D.S. Benedict. He is very quiet, makes few acquaintances, and in fact was comparatively little known before it came out that he was the hero of the advertisement. He boards in a private family, and they say he is very reserved, never engages in conversation, never goes out in the evening, and after supper retires to his room. No one seemed to know anything about him before he came here. He is about 5 foot 5 inches in height, light complexion, and would appear to be about 20 years old. He's going to teach a country school in this county and will receive $30 per month, out of which he is to pay his board. He advertised sometime in January and asked to have all his letters sent to G.D.B. Barton, Norcross, Minnesota, care of D.S. Benedict. About a week after that, a parcel of letters was forwarded to Morris, and every mail brought 2 or 3 more. A letter dated St. Paul, Minnesota, March 18th, but bearing the Morris, Minnesota postmark, seemed to trace the matter here, and when the Minneapolis gentleman got an answer to his letter, it was confirmed. When interviewed, Barton denied stoutly that he ever sent an advertisement to Minneapolis, or that he had ever received any letters addressed to G.D.B. Barton, care of D.S. Benedict. If notoriety was his object, he has gained what he sought. The part of the article where they write that he had actually posted older adverts in January caught my attention. So I went back through old copies of the Minneapolis Tribune, which we luckily have archived, and sure enough, in the personal section on January 11th, 1889, I found the following ad. A young gentleman desires to correspond with a young lady under 30 years of age who has some property. Object, a speedy marriage. Address stating age and personal description. George Barton, Norcross, Minnesota. This ad, as we've just read, did receive a decent amount of replies, and so obviously at some point in late January or early February, D.S. Benedict had written to the postmaster in Norcross and asked for all of George Benedict's mail to be forwarded to the postmaster in Morris, care of his friend, D.S. Benedict. And this is why I assume it was the postmaster in Morris who was able to fill in some of the gaps in the story to the journalist from The Sun. A couple of interesting things pop up when you compare the January ad to the ad that brought so many eyes on the story. Firstly, obviously, George Barton doesn't mention anything about $50,000 in his original ad. But also, both ads call for a very quick marriage and a woman who has some property. Perhaps with these bits of information we can start to make a guess at what sort of game D.S. Benedict was playing. 2 days after the Omaha Bee article, on April 4th in The Sun, we get pretty much the final printed chapter on the G.D. Barton saga, including direct input from D.S. Benedict himself. They write, Barton Benedict again. The editor is in receipt of a letter from D.S. Benedict in which he brands as a lie, nothing less, the statements contained in the extract from the Evening Journal published in The Sun last week. He says that he never inserted an ad in any paper over an assumed name, and that the letter purported to be written by him to the Minneapolis businessman, supposed lady wanting a $50,000 husband, is a forgery. Evidently, Mr. Benedict does not relish the notoriety that has been given him in this matter. No respectable person would, and he wants the Sun to contradict the statements made in the article above referred to because, he says, they are false. This G.D. Barton sensation, which has been going the rounds for several weeks, is becoming chestnutty, and readers must feel like yelling rats at any further reference to it. Therefore, while we have a well-established opinion of our own in the matter, we are not inclined to give undue publicity to what has resolved itself into an insignificant affair by arguing with Mr. Benedict the truth of the statements made by the journal. All concerned, we think, can afford to let this matter rest as it stands, with Mr. B's denial to the relief of a disgusted public. So, at this point in my digging into the story, I felt like I could confidently say that no G.D. Barton existed. It was a fake name used by D.S. Benedict to try and trick women into marrying him. I felt I could also comfortably assume that he lied when he said he was going to give the woman he married a whopping $50,000. The story he wrote to the Minneapolis businessman about his uncle's $100,000 inheritance doesn't pass the sniff test to me. The idea that this unassuming newspaper worker and part-time teacher had an uncle who had left him an approximately $3.6 million inheritance in today's money seems unlikely. Plus, if you watched my video on Rainmakers, you might remember how large wills with strange stipulations in them would make the news. Here's another news story from the same time as these events of a man bequeathing his nephew $100,000. It's an interesting story, so it made the news. Are we supposed to believe that D.S. Benedict's massive inheritance from his uncle was somehow kept secret until he accidentally shone a light on it? Seems doubtful. And here's the real kicker. Here's a news story from the exact same time as our story about an uncle who left his nephew a fortune so long as the nephew gets married in the next 5 years. An almost identical tale to D.S. Benedict's one. This story made headlines across the United States. If D.S. Benedict was truly experiencing the same thing as this, I feel like it would have been reported somewhere. But it wasn't. So no, I don't believe Benedict about the inheritance. Remember, as well, we were told his original ad did receive quite a lot of responses, so I think we can disregard the idea that the man was so starved for love that he made the whole thing up, just to try to desperately get a wife. He had replies and carried on advertising regardless. So, in my opinion, I think we have to assume he was running some sort of scam. At this point in my research, I desperately wanted to know more. What was his intention? Was he just trying to receive money like the scammer in Halifax? Or was it something altogether darker, like Bluebeard? I needed to learn more about D.S. Benedict. So, at this point, I did a little more digging, and I actually did find a little bit more information about the man. And whilst I'm not able to give you a concrete answer on his motive, I can tell you I did find a little more info which leads me to think I might have figured out a little of what D.S. Benedict was up to. On April 6th, in the Park Region Pioneer, Anna E.B. Rathbun writes, "Through the dispatch sent from this village to a Minneapolis paper, the G.D. Barton fair has been traced, with an appearance of plausibility, to a very young man who spent a week in this village once, and was not unknown at Pioneer office. If fun were his motive, he did not look like one who was up to it." So that's interesting. D.S. Benedict actually worked for a time at the Pioneer. It makes the fact that he sent his G.D.B. letter to the Pioneer make some sense. Plus, also possibly explains why that letter was addressed to Sir, even though it was well known that Anna Rathbun was the editor. I imagine this was D.S. Benedict trying to make an intentional mistake, to try and separate himself from the G.D. Barton character by implying he doesn't know who ran the Pioneer, even though he did. With this little bit of knowledge, I decided to go snooping into older copies of the Park Region Pioneer to see if I could find more information on D.S. Benedict. And as luck would have it, I actually found a couple more older references to him. On October 6th, 1888, months before the G.D. Barton story kicked off, we read in the Park Region Pioneer, "D.S. Benedict is a very capable type compositor who came here from New Richmond, Wisconsin last Wednesday, with good references, to see if Pelican can make a place for him. He has been at work in the Pioneer office these last days of the week, but the wages we can command for him cannot command him." 1 week later, on October 13th, 1888, in the Park Region Pioneer, we read, "D.S. Benedict, the young printer from Wisconsin, left Pelican Monday morning to take a situation in the newspaper office at Ashby. Then, curiously, a week after this, we hear from D.S. Benedict himself. He takes out a personal ad in the Park Region Pioneer on October 27th. He writes, "School wanted. Any district school not having engaged a teacher for the next term of school will do well to write me. I am willing to do janitor work without extra compensation. Good references given if required. Write immediately. D.S. Benedict, Ashby, Minnesota." A week later, the exact same ad is printed. And then a week after this, basically the same ad is printed again, although this time, "write immediately" is removed from the end. Perhaps he thought he was coming off too eager. And also, it says he's now situated in Morris, so seemingly the Ashby newspaper job didn't work out. This same ad is printed the next week. And then the following week, a more desperate ad is printed. "Reward. I will pay $10 to any person who will secure for me the position of teacher in a district school, either winter or spring term." A week later, the exact same ad is printed. And again, 2 weeks later, on December 15th, 1888. And this is the last ad he places in the Park Region Pioneer. 2 weeks after this ad, in the Park Region Pioneer and other local newspapers, a story is run about a 60-year-old man who owned 2 farms and had just made arrangements to live with his daughter, who had, instead, sadly, shot and killed himself. This man was named George Barton. 2 weeks after this story, D.S. Benedict posts his first ad under the name George Barton, saying how he is looking for a woman with property for a speedy marriage. Just to be clear, I mentioned the farmer who killed himself not to imply D.S. Benedict had anything to do with this death. Rather, my guess is that's where he took the pseudonym. He continues to post these ads as George Barton for a few weeks before stopping for a bit at the end of January 1889. And then something very interesting happens at the end of January 1889. A news story from Michigan starts getting printed in newspapers nationwide, including in smaller Minneapolis newspapers. It's the one I briefly mentioned earlier about a man named Luther James who left his nephew, J.L. Babcock, $500,000 so long as the nephew found a woman to marry in the next 5 years. This story caused a sensation. Tabloids excitedly reported. Presently, letters from women, young and old, began to pour in upon him, and to this correspondence he now devotes the greater part of his time. He takes the keenest enjoyment in the attention he receives, and the one fear of his life is that something will happen to break up his fun, as he puts it. And in other papers, J.L. Babcock talks about there being so many women writing to him and sending him their photographs, generally throwing themselves at him, that he may have to convene them in person in some sort of competition where he will, quote, examine their general health, intelligence, beauty, age, disposition, etc. Now, what do we think D.S. Benedict thought when he read this news story? I think this story was a light bulb moment for him, as a few weeks after he presumably read the story, G.D. Barton posted his first personal ad with the $50,000 sum attached. Perhaps he thought he was being reserved, and that if J.L. Babcock got a tsunami of letters for his $500,000, perhaps Benedict's $50,000 would set off just a steady stream of letters sent to Pelican Rapids. Either way, as we move away from the printed facts and over to conjecture, here's what I think we can say/guess about D.S. Benedict. He moves from Wisconsin to Minnesota. He finds himself working at the Pioneer, and even though he's good at his job, wants more money than they can pay for him, so leaves within a week of arrival. He heads to Ashby to work a newspaper job there, but in a few weeks he moves away from Ashby to go to Morris. Maybe the Ashby paper couldn't pay him a high enough salary either. In Morris, he starts to work at the Tribune, but they can't be paying him much, as he, at this point, starts putting out ads saying he's desperate for work as a teacher. This strikes me as a man that, for whatever reason, is desperate for a decent sum of money. When he starts putting out the marriage ads, he speaks about his urgency for marriage and for it to be to a woman with property. So I think it's safe to guess he was at best trying to find somewhere to live, and at worst trying to find an affluent lady whose wealth he could take. And also, interestingly, I've gone through census records in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I can't find any official records for a man born at the right time named D.S. Benedict. So that does make me lean towards the idea that D.S. Benedict maybe wasn't even his real name either. At the time, a Benedict was a word well known to mean a recently married man, and considering this man's desperate search for a wife, his name being akin to something like John Newlywed seems very on the nose to me. Add in the fact that we know he had no problem using the fake name of George Barton, it doesn't seem unlikely to me that D.S. Benedict is also a fake name. Of course, we're falling into guesswork here, but still, the picture of a strange man arriving in the state, bouncing from city to city, using a fake name, keeping himself to himself in public, but secretly trying to lure rich women to him with promises of riches that he simply doesn't possess, sets off red flags to me. However, as I've mulled this over for a few days, one other slightly more charitable theory about his motives has come to mind. The more I read about these old small-town newspapers, I start seeing them a striking similarity to today's social media, the way they're used to update everyone on people's small goings-on. The comparison is especially apparent to me in how people would write into the paper with personal ads, stories of something interesting that happened to them that day, and occasionally just little jokes they thought of. And they'd share these few character posts with their community, sometimes under their name, sometimes under a pseudonym, probably in the hopes for some sort of positive feedback, hoping people would like their story, maybe even share it. In this context, add in our man, D.S. Benedict, or whatever his real name was, to the story. A lonely chap who keeps himself to himself in public, barricaded alone in his room every night and poring over the papers, flicking through the pages like so many of us scroll past posts on social media today. He even writes into the papers occasionally, but his posts, as it were, don't get many reactions, like a user on Twitter getting hardly any retweets. Then he reads the story about another young man, J.L. Babcock, who's essentially going viral, getting a lot of reactions to his story, and a lot of replies, and so, perhaps jealous, D.S. Benedict makes up a story similar to the one he's read about, and posts it. It doesn't matter to him if it's not true, so long as he gets the attention, the engagement he's yearning for. Perhaps that's the only reason why he made up this whole thing. Like I say, this is probably too charitable a theory, but you never know, maybe there's some truth to it. Because this whole time I've been thinking that a modern equivalent to D.S. Benedict would be the Tinder swindler, but perhaps a more apt modern comparison could be that he was just an engagement farmer. So I was trying to think about how best to wrap this tale up, and I started to think that a man who tried so hard for his real name, whatever that actually was, to be hidden, shouldn't be where we end our story. Maybe it's better to look at someone who put their real name behind their words, and use those words to try and help others, rather than just helping themselves. Anna E.B. Rathbun, the Minnesota Editress, the person D.S. Benedict thought he could use as part of his scam, but actually was a big part in foiling it, I think she's the person we should end this video focusing on. When I went through the archive of the Park Region Pioneer, I was fascinated to read just how, to me, modern her editorials were. She wrote impassioned articles on social issues, about women's rights and about the rights of the working class in general, and how immoral it was for the extremely wealthy to take advantage of those less financially fortunate. She even attempted to start an organisation that she called a Women's National Protective League, whose plan would be to establish, quote, a vast and thorough cordon of women's cooperative havens, rurally located, into which can be drawn from all the oppression of the cities all maids, widows and deserted wives who are willing to make common cause. These havens for husbandless women, as Anna called them, were to be created with the sole purpose of providing a sense of security, both socially and financially, to women who were single, whether through choice or otherwise. Anna clearly put a lot of effort into trying to get this idea off the ground, as she wrote a lot of articles about this, trying to secure funding for it. Sadly, I can't find any record of this women's haven, as Anna was planning it, actually coming to fruition. But I've been thinking over the last few days of writing this script that, in the case of D.H. Benedict, he probably tried to do something unscrupulous, and though he didn't succeed, I'm still here documenting his story. So then, in the case of Anna, who tried to create something fantastic, just because she didn't succeed, why not tell that story too? Though history books may not have recorded her specific voice in this matter, she still worked as hard for her cause as many other people whose names we more readily remember. In fact, she actually sort of addresses this point in one of her articles. When talking about her idea, she writes, "There is no patent on it. Though idea cannot die, neither can it be successfully resisted by wind and wave, because it goes with and not against the tide and trend of human affairs. If we, as projectors, be worthy to lead its progress, we should be gratified to receive the confidence of our fellow women by the responses we call for. If natural selection appoints others more fit, may no personal ambition of ours hurt or hinder the good work." History doesn't always do a good job of recording those who try to do everyday good, and does an altogether better job at recounting the deeds of those who act wickedly towards their fellow humans. So how about in this video, we forget that guy who wrote that personal ad that made us fall down this rabbit hole to begin with. To be honest, he didn't want his name remembered anyway. Instead, why not end this video by saying cheers to a name worth remembering? Anna E.B. Rathbun, the Minnesota Editress. Poet, writer, editor, publisher, activist, and thorn in the side of at least one romance scammer. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd very much appreciate it if you could like, and if you're not subscribed, I would also appreciate it if you would subscribe. Also, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by just how many people saw the last video and all the lovely positive responses it got. No idea why YouTube decided to suddenly show one of my videos to so many people, but I'm so thankful that it did. So thank you very much for liking and subscribing. But for now, that's everything I got for you today. Bye, folks.